sex and intimacy have the idea of very taboo things to talk about. And how are you starting to change the conversation to allow these conversations to be less taboo? Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. I have such a delight with us today. I have Dr. Alexandra Stockwell. She is the intimacy doctor, and she is a relationship and intimacy coach. She is changing the cultural narrative on intimacy in long term relationships, and we have so much amazingness to discuss today. So I can't wait to hear from you, Dr. Stockwell, and have this amazing discussion.
Well, we've both been looking forward to it, and I feel very privileged to be in your forum.
Well, thank you so much. I would love to hear your background and how you got into this intimacy coaching.
Okay, well, professionally speaking, I was in my mid 30s. I had a small practice. I trained in family medicine. I had a small practice north of Boston. I met my husband the first week of medical school, so we were already married for a while. We have 4 children, but at the time we had 3. I'd paid off all of my medical school loans. And having worked pretty hard and in a very focused manner to get to that for, I don't know, 15 years or whatever it is, I thought I would have some sense of having arrived. Like, okay, I've worked hard to achieve this. Now I've achieved it. I just thought, okay, now that's like I know life has challenges and ups and downs, but pending some catastrophe, I thought I'm set to live the rest of my life.
Mhm.
But I didn't have that sense of gratification, of fulfillment, and I wasn't burnt out. I loved practicing medicine. This really was all at the level of a whisper, and I knew that if I didn't listen, if I didn't somehow pay attention to whatever this was that was slowly creeping into my awareness, it would rise to the level of a roar eventually. And part of this really included my getting very clear that despite having tried all kinds of different mindset and time management tools, internally, I still prioritize my patients over my family and my family over myself. And
Mhm.
these two awarenesses, I just decided to make it matter to me, to like give it attention. And so, having tried all kinds of different things and really felt like I was bushwhacking through territory with like no landmarks, and I didn't know how I was going to really solve this. At the time, the only physicians that I knew of who left clinical medicine either went into research or to work for a pharmaceutical company, or they left clinical medicine involuntarily due to accident or addiction. Now there are, of course, so many physicians who have expanded how they serve people, but I didn't know it at the time. So I arranged for a sabbatical, mostly to give myself some space
Mhm.
to just explore and largely to do something for no reason other than that I felt like it, which was very radical and very confronting and did not include things on my to do list. So I did that and um, I did various trainings. I went to the School of Women's Arts. I took a painting class. I sat by the river. I did some spiritual trainings. I spent days just doing nothing. I just had a spaciousness that had been unfamiliar with me since before adolescence. And I got to the point where I did feel vibrancy, vitality, a sense of alignment and purpose. And the one area that still wasn't satisfying, I just felt like I hadn't really mined the depths or figure out how to really enjoy it, was sensuality and sexuality, both for myself and my own relationship to my body, not body image, but the embodiment and my marriage. And so I signed up for a very in-depth, edgy, profound, basic, like the whole thing, a training on sensuality and sexuality, which doubled as a coach training. But at the time, I didn't know what a coach was. It
Mhm.
had I wasn't interested in coaching as a client or as a coach, but I did this training because I wanted the transformation for myself and my marriage, and then I was curious. I'm interested in educational models. I've done a lot of consulting in schools, and so I thought, well, let me just check out the teaching lab, see what the people who want to become coaches are learning about and how that's set up, and how do you train people to work with clients in this way.
Mhm.
And when I went to the teaching lab, I just immediately had the sense of being home. And through relationship and intimacy coaching, I'm able to share not all, but most of what I wanted to give as a physician. And I don't have any of the restrictions of all kinds that I had as a physician. So I feel like in many ways, my medical training just paved the way for me to be a relationship and intimacy coach.
We always have that in our culture and in our society is sex and intimacy. We have the idea of very taboo things to talk about. And how are you starting to change the conversation to allow these conversations to be less taboo? And especially as females who are often told not to talk about their sexual desires, what are you doing to help people that really improve their way to communicate their needs or their desires?
Yeah, so there are two aspects to that question.
Mhm.
When I talk about my mission being to change the cultural narrative around long term relationships so
Mhm.
that people no longer see them as a place where passion goes to die, but instead it's a place for amazing vitality, vibrancy, intimacy, connection, and fuel to live the rest of our lives in the best way possible. There are two aspects to that. One is that as a physician, you of course know that human beings are mammals and mammals learn through imitation. And we don't learn calculus through imitation. We don't like there's certain very high functioning skills that we learn through education, but I wouldn't say specifically through imitation. But pretty much with few exceptions and absent some profound intentionality, the way that we learn to interact with ourselves and with other people, and especially people that we're intimate with. I don't just mean sexually intimate, I mean the people we're closest to. Those are ways of being that are learned through imitation. And there is a profound lack of good role models that are actually worth imitating in this realm. So if somebody wants to be an amazing tech entrepreneur. There's Steve Jobs or perhaps Mark Zuckerberg, or, to become an amazing athlete. We have all kinds of Simone Biles, Tiger Woods, like whatever your passion is. But when it comes to really great, long lasting relationships that aren't just beautiful collaborative companionships, I think there's enough of that in our society, but really passionate where it doesn't feel like in terms of the relationship, it's just in kind of savoring what was already built, but it continues to grow and expand and gratify. We really don't have role models for how to do that. And there isn't really any education happening for most people in any other realm. And another thing to add to this is that I deeply believe that having a fantastic relationship is a learnable skill. And so it's not that someone didn't have good role models in childhood or picked the wrong partner, or all of those things are important variables in specific instances, but the more important thing is that it's a learnable skill if you get the education. And there just isn't a lot of education around. So when I'm talking about changing the cultural narrative,
Mhm.
one of the things I'm talking about is providing the education for people to really be most authentic, to give and receive in the right ways that bring pleasure and purpose and meaning to life.
Yeah, and we were talking, you have a wonderful podcast, and I mentioned that I'm single, and it has helped me, with that intimacy for self. And I find that it's hard for me. I often pause. I had an ex-boyfriend that passed away when I was in residency, and I just developed this aversion to romance, and I learned it was more of like a self-hatred. And I'm curious how many times someone comes to you and the issue that they might be having is really that sense of self, lack of self-compassion or lack of self-love.
I think that it is always the primary thing, but I'm gonna talk about it in a way that's gonna sound very different from what you're saying, but
Mhm.
it's kind of, that story, The Six Blind Men and the Elephant? It's an Indian legend where the six blind men, they hear about elephants in their culture all the time, but they've never seen one, obviously, because 'cause they're blind, and then there's an opportunity to experience one, and so one of the blind men reaches out and touches the side of the elephant and says, "Oh, an elephant is like a wall," and another one feels the trunk and says, "Oh, it's like a rope." Anyway, I'm just saying that because I think you're pointing to something which is profoundly true, and I mean to point to the same thing, but in a very different way.
Mm.
So the way that I talk about it, that is how I interact with clients, either single or partnered, quite frankly, is to talk about compromise. Because throughout the world, the most common relationship advice that is given is that you need to learn to compromise.
Mhm.
If you want a great marriage, you have to be great at compromising. And when I think of compromise, what I think of is essentially turning away from one's own desires, needs, thoughts, feelings, beliefs, challenges. In any case, turning away from one's own desires, the truth within, and turning away in the sense of like brushing it aside, being in denial, in any case, not honoring it. And the reason not to honor it is so that our partner is more comfortable because we have the idea that they will be uncomfortable if we express our truth. And so, actually, I have it here. The name of my book
Yeah, that's what I was
is,
gonna lead into, was I'm like, well, that's a
yeah,
can you tell
yeah,
us
it's,
what's in your book?
yeah. Well, what I wanted to show is that the name of it, here,
Yeah.
is Uncompromising Intimacy, because I'm not advocating being uncompromising in the sense of being controlling. You always get your own way. Like, I will not compromise. That's not what I mean. But where compromise is prioritizing your partner's comfort over what is true for you,
Mhm.
in being uncompromising and cultivating uncompromising intimacy, I'm talking about bringing all of yourself to the relationship, not needing to check some parts at the door, but instead, whatever your desires are, whatever your deepest concerns are, that you can bring those to the relationship in such a way that your partner can hear them and invite him or her to do the same. So, to connect that with your question, one could say that the like epidemic, pandemic of personal compromise in relationship is very much akin to or an expression, another symptom of the same phenomenon that you're talking about when you talk about a lack of self-love making it impossible to really be open to connecting with another person. And just to say one more thing about that, that if you don't honor yourself, if you don't like open to what's the next most authentic way of being or the next most authentic communication, whether it's speaking or listening, then you restrict how much connection is available.
Mhm.
And when you're restricting how much connection is available, you're definitely restricting how much passion is available because whereas in a one night stand, we can have a very gratifying time without even knowing our partner's name or like anything about that person. But when you have a life together and you're married or in a long term partnership, everything that's happening that isn't sex functions as foreplay. Each interaction either brings you a little bit closer together or a little bit further apart. And we don't have some amazing switch to flip when we get to the bedroom. when we are interacting with the same person that we're going to have sex with
Mm.
throughout the day or throughout the week, we need to interact in a way that's contributing to more connection, which again requires an amount of connection and self awareness with ourselves, or otherwise, what we're offering isn't actually making connection available.
Yeah, and when you're talking about compromising, so a lot of my brain has learned sex and things to be very objectifying. Like when I read what you were doing for coaching, I was like, this is such a healing opportunity because in our society, with everything we see in the media, it's just like the female body has become objectified. And that is something that strongly reduces passion in my mind or feeling sense of safety. And it certainly didn't increase my libido, and as
Or
physicians
anybody else's
or any
ever.
right? And it just is so harmful, the narratives that are really in the culture and the inability to speak because it becomes taboo actually becomes more harmful. Because if we don't speak and say, no, we really need to advocate for ourselves, our safety, our passion, true, authentic connection, because if we think about one night stands, that could be another way of asking, like, what are you trying to prove to that person? What are you giving away? Like, what's the actual engagement there? Because if it's trying to say that you're valuable, it often does the opposite. Like, it has that oxytocin release, and then you're left with nothing. So if we develop, and I'm just talking out loud here, thinking like, wow, how helpful it would be to have a coach, especially relearning everything that I have to unlearn from those negative interactions. I'm 33 now, right? I've spent years just avoiding people, like men, women, just like my intimacy, to your point, not even just one-on-one relationship, but I find that it just makes you not want people to touch you because that sense of safety or the sense of feeling like it's a positive thing to have touch can often be lost when we only hear the narratives that are playing. So I'm curious to know, what are people like, what does your coaching look like? Can you help me uh
Yes, absolutely. So I just want to presence because I think it'll make the conversation even more interesting, which is that as you share in many places, this isn't me revealing something
yeah,
that hasn't yet been revealed, that you have a history of anorexia, and I do not have a history of anorexia, but I certainly have been overweight and obese by various medical definitions a good portion of my life. And so it's a very different journey, but they're related issues in
right.
terms of um, body image. And so, just to say that what I'm about to say is how I would navigate, like how I coach someone, no matter what the context is for their um, disharmonious relationship to their body,
Mm,
even though there's significant differences in what the flavor is for this. I would coach all people the same way.
mhm,
And um, I want to make sure to say I have a program. It's called Intimacy, and it goes into each of these things in depth. And it's actually a fairly short program, but if anyone is listening and this part of the conversation is particularly interesting, I highly recommend that. But the thing that I want to say is so important, and anyone can hear this and use it, is that when it comes to like restrictions in intimacy related to body image, the real key, and this is the key for most restrictions to intimacy, at least initially, is to connect with your own sensuality.
mhm,
In other words, that one of the hangups with body image and objectification is that we have our attention on what the other person sees when they see us naked or clothes. That's not, I guess, not essential, but it's like I'm projecting what I think this other person is experiencing when they look at me, and I'm not feeling satisfied with what that is. That will never lead to any kind of nourishing intimacy.
Mhm.
What leads to nourishing intimacy, completely regardless of what the actual physique looks like, is bringing your attention to how you feel. So I might have someone, if this is foreign, just start by closing their eyes so they're not getting visual input. And like, in fact, I'll just close my eyes. You do what you want. But like if you're watching and you close your eyes, obviously if you're driving, don't do that. But if you close your eyes, like, what do you feel? What are you aware of? I feel like a little bit of tension on the um, inner part of my right arch. And usually I'm really not aware of what's happening in my back. I'm much more aware of things that are more anterior, meaning towards the front of my body. Um, I probably am aware a little bit of having my cheeks a little bit flushed. Since I open my eyes for a moment and see you're closing your eyes, what do you feel? What sensations are you aware of?
It was funny because before you provided the permission to close our eyes, I naturally wanted to do that. Again, I loved your voice, and everyone needs to listen to your podcast. I find it hearing your voice. I think you should record like a meditation to this, unless you already have done that, because it provided that tone with me reconnecting with my body, which is different for me, who with an eating disorder often dissociates from body. And it's been a year for me of that's why I write up, very publicly. It's been a year of reconnecting with body. So it's fascinating to me because I can tune into my body and it's a different experience. And I have so much deep self compassion for my body because of everything I've put it through and the healing journey I'm on right now. So it's a very positive experience for me now where it hasn't always been.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And that really conveys a lot in what you've said. It's so beautiful. And if you and I were to coach together, I might leave it like that for one session and the next session do it again and have you become more specific. Because with specificity, like you'll notice I said a little bit of tension on the inner part of my right arch. Like I was actually experiencing that. That was not a theoretical thing. I paid attention, and that's one of the places my attention went. But the point is that there's like the overall feeling of connection, which you expressed so beautifully. That's like the first step, and then the next step is to become more specific, because when we're looking in the mirror as women, we can get super specific about what we're experiencing and what we think about it, and how this bit of hair is, and whatever. And the body is this whole rich area of experiences, and in order to have physical intimacy and passion, we need to, it's almost like a different way of thinking or a different consciousness, but we need to bring our attention into our body. And in addition to what we just did, another way to do that really is to pay attention to the breath. In fact, if I am coaching a woman who gets in her head during sex, and whether she's getting in her head because she thinks she smells, or her vagina smells, or because she thinks there's something about body image, or because she forgot to pack school lunches for the, like, whatever, it doesn't really matter what the content is. Just going in the head has the same effect of taking you out of your body. And so a way to come back into the body is what we just did, and another way is really to pay attention to the breath. Now, when people meditate, it can definitely be a much more cerebral, ephemeral, wonderful experience. And I'm not talking about that.
Mhm.
I'm talking about like having your attention on your genitals while you breathe, or on your heart. Either one is fine, depending on the situation. And that can bring you back into the body, because our bodies have so much wisdom. Like, I don't actually believe that there's any woman who's not capable of orgasm. I do, of course, believe there are women who haven't orgasmed or who have to work really hard or someone else has to work really hard for it to happen. But I think that that is expressing a lack of connection with our bodies. And yes, it is fantastic to have more skillful lovers, but that's not enough. If we're not actually connected with our body, we can't receive the pleasure that's available. So you might be pointing to the exact same thing and talk about self love and self compassion. And those are all qualities of that. But the reason that I talk about it the way that I do is because I want to make sure it comes all the way into the body. It's
Mhm.
not just like being in approval of ourselves, it's actually feeling what's there. And when we can feel the tension in the inner part of our right arch, well,
Mhm.
you can feel all kinds of things in all kinds of places.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's so fascinating too because I had a year ago I signed up for Martha Beck's Wayfinder Life Coach training, and I chose
Yeah.
that program because she does embodiment. And a year ago, had we had this discussion, I'd still be completely dissociated. But I was a surgical resident, and I had a lot of physical and mental health things that were like pointing me away from like the lifestyle of a surgeon. I was like, it doesn't feel like the right fit. I feel like my value is somewhere else. But I ignored the body, and like the body has so much it can tell us. And so in Martha Beck's Wayfinder Life Coach training, we do a lot of body compass work. And like
Yes.
that information that we can receive and how often, sorry if you can hear there's a storm going on, but how often do we allow ourselves, especially in training or the busyness of society, to allow ourselves to like sit and actually feel, especially the somatic feelings?
Yeah. And, you know, I want to be really respectful. It is a superpower that physicians can ignore their body and soul experiences. And there are many circumstances in which that is a necessary asset to
Yeah.
be able to deal with trauma and sorrow and like make good decisions in the face of very complicated circumstances. That is a skill, but it means that when we're not working or when we're working too much,
Mhm.
it's a whole other skill to reconnect with the body that many don't even value it enough to come back to it. And I really love hearing you talk about the body mapping and the embodiment in Martha Beck's program. I'm not familiar with the detailed curriculum of her program, but I know about body mapping and I want to just like um, being embodied is so important, and many of the embodiment practices, which are profound, healing, transformational, and really enhance people's relationship to themselves and their whole lives, despite all of those fantastic benefits, many of them don't include sexual energy. I'm
Mhm.
not talking about having sex. I'm talking about erotic energy, sexual energy. So we learn to connect with the body and the vitality that's there, but the erotic energy isn't welcomed into those spaces. And I understand why that's true because it takes a lot to guide people with sexual energy in a way that truly is responsible and doesn't cross boundaries inappropriately, but still feels juicy. Like, I'm actually happy at this point to be an older, overweight woman because then I can bring a certain amount of erotic energy and flirtatious energy and juiciness. And both because of my maturity and lived experience, I'm not crossing boundaries. But also, if I were like a 25-year-old model,
Right.
it would be a completely different thing to talk about the topics that I do while literally making space for other people to connect with their bodies.
Mhm.
It's never that they're like it their connection with their bodies is never mediated or influenced by my own sexual energy. But when I'm bringing a kind of juiciness forward, and I'm not talking about erotic energy and sexuality in a fairly dehydrated manner, but when I'm bringing it like in a juicy way, I'm really just providing permission. I'm tapping into the fact that mammals learn through imitation while really having space for it to happen in a like in a way that belongs to the person having it. And so I think that that is another piece to changing the cultural narrative to my coaching. And in fact, when I did pretty much all of the training that I've done in terms of sensuality and sexuality that was not academic, but really was more experiential, somatic, I was the only person driving home after our intensive weekends to the suburbs to my husband and children to make sure homework had been completed and school lunches were packed for the next day. Like it I was most of the trainings I've done have been in the context of young people, uncommitted people, all kinds of various ethical non-monogamy configurations. And it's not that I've absorbed any of that, but those are people who have enough freedom and a kind of lack of professional structure and existential structure that gives them access to these amazing energies that I knew I wanted in my marital bedroom. So I actually feel like this is this is part of my unique contribution, that people don't need to go to some seedy side of San Francisco to access this, because I'm presenting it in the suburbs, so to speak,
Mhm.
with the professionalism that I bring to the situation. But I have danced in those energies in a way that I know is the difference between life feeling kind of stale versus being vibrant and full of vitality.
Yeah, I love that you're changing the cultural norms, especially as when you were talking about even medicine. Like if we think about how it was everyone kind of did that traditional path and we think, okay, if I don't do medicine, what do I do? I think sometimes just that traditional everything, then we just assume that's the status quo. And it takes someone like yourself to say, hold the phone. We can do better. And let me show you the way. So if someone's hearing this and said, I'm really interested in your coaching, can you tell us? I know that you have different types of programs you're offering. I'd love to hear about them.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So I know that everyone is a sexual being, whether or not they're behaving or experiencing that in any given moment. And the reason that I say that is that everyone is wherever they are in their journey. So I actually have a whole range of offerings so that no matter where someone is, they can dip a toe in or dive right in or whatever it is. So I have a number of free, informative downloadables on my website, alexandrastockwell.com. One of them is the first chapter to my book, which is a great place to start. It details the different kinds of relationships. The name of that chapter is Companionship as Good as It Gets. It's really my response to people who think that all or most couples end up like roommates. And then I also have my podcast, which of course is free, the Intimate Marriage Podcast. And I have my book, which is available on Amazon and Audible. And I also have two, I think of them as introductory programs, but they are very potent and will totally change your life if that's what you want. And if what you want is to just get a little more information, they'll provide that as well. One is called Desires, Awaken the Woman Within, because our relationship
I
to our
can't
desires.
count.
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't mean
Well,
to.
our
Oh,
relationship to our desires is where it all starts
Mhm.
and where the first place most of us are stuck. So, Desires Awaken the Woman Within, that's a program just for women. And then I have Intimacy, which details the three blocks and three ways to create more emotional intimacy, more sensual intimacy, and more erotic intimacy. And let me just say that that is a program that is amazing for single people and partnered people, because the erotic intimacy I talk about is needing a partner, but in the way that I talked before about needing connect with your own body, the real key to sensual intimacy is between you and yourself.
Hmm.
And so there's that program. And then for people in committed relationships who want to improve communication or connection, have more closeness, more physical intimacy, my signature program is the Aligned and Hot Marriage program. And yeah, with alignment comes the heat. And then I definitely also do private coaching, which is entirely customized. So I know that I probably took quite a while answering that particular question, but one of the reasons I did is I want to give a flavor for anyone watching that, like like if someone's going to go to a sex toy shop, let's say,
Hmm.
it can sometimes take months, years to have the courage to just go into the parking lot.
Hmm.
And I don't want my teachings to be like that. I want it to be very easy that wherever you are, you can just learn one more thing about how you relate to yourself and how you relate to a partner or someone you love if you want to.
Yeah, and I think that's why it was so great to have this discussion today. It's normalizing the conversations, because if we don't normalize these conversations, which I find to be safe and healthier, then we normalize the what's already happening, which I have found to be detrimental. So I really appreciate everything that you're sharing with us. And is there anything that you wish to share that maybe I haven't asked you yet?
Yeah, I feel like for me, in a way that completely makes sense, there's a little bit of a heaviness in our conversation
Mhm.
because these are serious, important topics.
Right.
And I just want to say, we're talking about something very fun.
Yeah.
And like, that's part of why I'm saying, like, I want to make it easy to just get started, find something out. No one even needs to know you're doing it. Like, we're really talking about having more fun
Mhm.
and having more smiles, laughter, more silliness, more play, even though we've talked about it as the very important topic it is. And it deserves that. I wouldn't want there to be like giggles while we talk that are kind of detracting from the gravity of the topic.
Yes.
But this is about more fun.
Yeah, and I think honestly it is, it's like making sure that this is a very serious discussion, because I think probably that's part of my bias to say let's not, intimacy is very meaningful. It can have such a great role in your life. And kind of what you were saying with the young, and you know they're not, it's often not intentional, but if we make it intentional and we, it definitely sound, I mean, to me it sounds fun, and we are reserved when we're listening because it's like you have the internal feelings and the thoughts, and like, yeah, that's private, we'll go have a one-on-one coaching discussion later. And especially if family belief systems, religious belief systems make you think a lot of certain things. It's like, what do I do with all this? So we'll package it up. We'll make sure to put your all of your information down below. I highly recommend starting with your podcast if they're, trying to figure out where to start next. I listened to the Seek Growth today, and it
Mm.
just, I'm gonna soak them all up. So with that, is the one that I had the chance to listen today, and I loved it. So thank you so much.
Okay, well, I think that's phenomenal. Listen, start with Seek Growth, then listen to the interview I did with my husband where we talked about our intimate marriage. Then it's just a good series of 4, because then I tell about 4 couples who have different challenges and how they created an aligned and hot marriage. And all of that is so that I could then say that one of my most recent episodes was interviewing a couple that's been married for 51 years.
Wow.
And she talks about having the best orgasms of her life.
There you go.
And they have a lot of embodiment practices that they do separately and together. And again, I want people to know what is possible. And let me add very, very genuinely, there's no rush. There's no rush. Wherever anybody is, it is a great place to be today.
Perfect. And I it just also emphasizes the role of coach, right? You've got all your programs to meet everybody where you're at, all the resources for people to meet themselves where they're at. So thank you so much to Dr. Alexandra Stockwell. She is the intimacy physician, the intimacy doctor, and she is changing the cultural narrative on intimacy in long-term relationships. It was so great to hear from you, and I can't wait to dive more into your work.
Thank you so much and for the care with which you ask these important questions.
Thank you. And please let us know your questions and make sure you connect with Dr. Stockwell. Thanks for being here.